Hello to everybody out there for another masterclass. So today we're going to be talking, as per usual, in two parts. The first part is going to be this week based around only the best attend. Yes, that's very true. So part one is basically we're going to discuss Sun Tzu. And I don't think that's going to be too surprising for some people. Because The Art of War, the text and treatise that he wrote many, many years ago, is still very applicable in many respects today. And I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned through that particular text in how you kind of operate as an information security professional. And there's a couple of ideals in there that go down very well and kind of give you a good perspective as to probably some of the ways to think about things, some of the ways to handle things, and some of the ways to kind of enact in your plans and your activities as you go through your life as an information security professional. Part two, we're pulling away a little bit from some of the GRC content. We've covered a number of different items within that space. And I want to kind of go into something a little bit different. So we'll be talking about wargaming. And I'll go into that obviously in a little bit more depth in part two. There's a reason behind it. So part one, Sun Tzu. Let me pull over my notes. Okay. Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. The Art of War has been a particular text recommended for all types of people throughout all parts of history, be you in the military, be you business people, and indeed for a lot of, for instance, Japanese business people going through, their version of university or college, depending upon where you are in the world. This is a book that's actually recommended on the recommended reading list, and one that they refer to on a regular basis. And it's like that with a lot of business colleges, because there are very much a lot of similarities between waging war and undertaking warfare and dealing in this space, dealing in any space, really. It would be you an athlete or whatever. So when you read through The Art of War, and I've read it quite a few times, and I do suggest you pick up a copy because it's so old, like really old. You can actually pick up free copies of it. It's not under any copyright as far as I'm aware. I mean, I downloaded an application for my phone, which is basically an audio version of The Art of War. And I do listen to it when I'm cycling around or when I'm sort of wandering about. And many of it is, a lot of it is if you read the original text, it's a collection of kind of ideals and statements. Over time, if you pick up some of the later copies where people have kind of done different versions of it, where they've kind of expanded upon it and put their own take on it. So you can pick those up as well. And some of them are quite interesting in the way that they communicate. And you can pick up versions of it which directly relate to things like business and what have you as well. I like the original text because, well, you can't beat the original, really, in many respects. Obviously, I don't read it in in its native language, because that would be very difficult, because I do not speak Chinese or even read Chinese. Plus, no doubt the language it's using is probably very, very old, even if I did speak that particular language, because dialects change. So, some of the more interesting statements when talking about information security are some probably of the most famous ones. Now, the first one I'm going to start with is one that a lot of people have heard. And I'm going to read it directly as it's kind of quoted and translated, obviously. So Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, "If you know the enemy and you know yourself, then you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, then you will succumb in every battle." Now, I love this particular statement when I mentor people and when I talk to people and train people up in InfoSec. This is one of my go-to quotes that emphasizes very much everything you need to know around how to undertake InfoSec in general. What it basically translates and means is, in this context, is if you know the tactics that your enemy are going to use and you know detail behind how they are going to feasibly undertake their malicious actions against you, and it's not, I'm not just talking about a specific group, or you can if you want, but in general, a lot of these groups, malicious actors use similar kind of tactics, and people who are committing insider fraud use similar tactics. Pretty much any aspect of larceny in the digital space that you can think of that you may be dealing with tends to operate with similarities. Okay, so once you get to know those, you know what to spot, you know how to feasibly deal with it, which obviously we'll cover in part 2 with wargaming. But if you know how the enemy works, but you don't know how your organization is set up, if you don't know what your assets are, if you don't know the network infrastructure that you're dealing with, you don't know the people that you have in the business, you don't know the tools that you have available to you, then you're going to get some problems down the line. And as this says, you can know everything there is to know about InfoSec and walk into an organization tomorrow. If somebody does try to attack you, half the time you may win through, half the time you won't. It's 50-50 because you don't know your environment. This is why one of the first things that you need to do when you go into an organization, no matter the size of it, no matter what it is, you need to get to know that organization fully and as you've heard me on various other masterclass sessions, you need to understand the culture, you need to understand the personalities, you need to understand the power play as well. That's quite an important one. You need to know the budget's open to you. There's a whole host of stuff that you need to be aware of, that you need to understand. The risk profile, how they view risk, what is their risk tolerance. All of this stuff kind of builds up to understanding your organization, which means when you start defending it, you're putting in strategic defenses that will work for that organization as its own entity, because every organization is different. Like the malicious actors and the way that they undertake attacks, there are lots of similarities. So you can gain a lot of experience, say, in the manufacturing area. And any manufacturing company you go to will have similarities because they do tend to operate in a similar kind of fashion. But there'll be a lot of differences as well. So whenever you walk into an organization for the first time, even if it's in a sector that you've been working in for years and years and years and years and years, treat it as though you're just walking into it for the first time. Get to know what's going on within that organization. Understand everything that you need to understand within that environment, as well as what potential malicious actors were going to be targeting you. Because there are some malicious actors that are very specific in who they target. For instance, if you're helping secure a hospital, you're probably not going to get attacked by the ransomware guys. You may still get unlucky, but they don't tend to like that kind of thing. They specifically don't go for that type of target. Some of the more ruthless ones may well do. You're more likely to suffer some kind of data loss or other kind of security event that isn't related to that. So as Sun Tzu says, you've got to get to know yourself, you've got to get to know your organization, you've got to get to know those who are feasibly going to be attacking you, or be they insiders, be they external, be they knowledgeable, be they not knowledgeable, be they willing, be they unwilling. Doesn't matter what it is. Really important, probably one of the most important. The other really good quote that I like, and again, I'm going to read it out in its fullest. All warfare is based on deception. Okay. Never has there been a truer statement than that. It does go on from that particular quote about attacking when you seem unable, appear inactive when the enemy is near. And some of that does come into context, but it's that first part that is probably the most pertinent. All warfare is based on deception. And when you're running the security in an organization, any tactics levied against you are going to heavily use deception as a tactic to either hide from you, distract you, to going into one area or concentrating in one particular area, rather than where the battle is actually feasibly being fought. They're going to try and draw you away. But equally, you can use similar kinds of tactics yourself in your defensive measures. For many, many years, people have used things like honeypots. Now, a honeypot is basically a false network that looks like a real network. It's got potentially real items in it, equipment in it, or virtual equipment normally. And it looks like databases stuffed full of cardholder information, that kind of thing. In reality, it's a separate network that's used to draw the malicious actors to it, like bees to honey, you know. They'll get drawn to it. As a tendency, a lot of outside malicious actors, not the internal people, although you can use that as well to a certain extent, they go with the path of least resistance. They don't want to hang around. They don't want to stick about. They want to get in. They want to get what they want to get. Dig in a bit like a tick. It depends if you're being attacked by an access broker or whether you're being attacked by somebody who's actually trying to do damage or even ransomware you or something like that. So watch out for that kind of deceptive tactics. This is why IDS IPS, for instance, is a really good countermeasure to add into your portfolio of tools that you have within an organization's technical environment. It's got a chance, it's not foolproof, a chance to detect what looks like normal traffic, what looks like good traffic, but in actual fact, it's masking some form of attack. Web application firewalls are another good one here. You know, information that looks like it's good for a website coming into a website, say buffer flow overflows, SQL injections, that kind of thing, that to that device look like normal and are just a normal function that's being run within a field, can get picked up by that web application firewall and stopped before anything bad happens, like they start downloading databases. Another quote: "The greatest victory is that which requires no battle." So again, this is a really good quote for InfoSec in general, for a number of different reasons. Malicious actors, external ones specifically, and feasibly internal as well, they, as I said, they tend to follow the path of least resistance, but they tend to go for the low-hanging fruit. If you have portrayed a greater level of security and competence than feasibly a competitor or somebody else in the business or another organization they're fingerprinting, then there's a good chance they're going to leave you alone. That's not to say that that's foolproof, but it's like if you're walking up to a house to rob a house, good example. If you see a camera, if you see a camera with a big sign saying "Smile, you're on CCTV," and a big sign on the gate that says "Beware of the dog," they're probably going to go elsewhere. It's too much pain. It's too much aggravation. Now, you may not have a dog, and you may just have something that randomly barks. Like getting a certain. I'm going to turn it off now. Alexa, who you can get it to randomly bark apparently, or you can download applications for phones that will do that. Which sounds like you've got a dog in the house. You don't have a dog, but it dissuades burglars because they don't want a noisy animal kicking off. Same with the CCTV. You may have a camera, but it may be a dummy camera. It might not be wired into anything. It might just be sat there. cheap and cheerful. But again, it's enough to deter and assuage, the average criminal. Now, obviously, it's better to have a camera, and it's better potentially to have a dog. But if you don't have the ability to do it, or you don't have the revenue to do it, at least you've got something that kind of dissuades people from getting into your house and nicking your favorite stuff. In InfoSec, one of the things I'm very, very aware of at the moment is the amount of tools that we've got available to the average InfoSec department or within the organization. Problem is they tend to be horribly expensive, and budgets in InfoSec are still pretty bad. I'll be honest, they're pretty terrible. So you're not going to be able to buy everything. You're going to have to pick and choose specifically and carefully what tools you're going to have within the organization. Now, some of them, like firewalls and some of the network monitoring stuff, will be kind of covered by the IT budget. But when we're talking about kind of like endpoint security and various other different types of security as well, like GRC tools and what have you, these are phenomenally expensive items to acquire. And if you've got a very low budget, then 1, 2, 3 tools can pretty much wipe your budget out. So just pick carefully. So when somebody is coming to feasibly fingerprint your organization to attack, you will look strong, have a good perimeter defense, have a good firewall, have it reporting properly, the whole thing. If you've got a good sort of level of defense and they look at you and go, this one's going to be a tough nut to crack, they're more likely to go off and try somewhere else. You also hear people say obscurity is no form of security. I do agree with that. Obscurity isn't a form of security, but you can show a much more active posture is probably the best way to describe it within security to prevent people from specifically going for you. So the greatest victory is that which requires no battle. So one of the other quotes I like, it's actually 5 mini quotes within a single quote. Thus we know that there are 5 essentials for victory. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. 3, he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout its ranks. 4, he will win who prepared himself waits to take the enemy unprepared. And finally, number 5, he will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. These are actually really kind of important for the average InfoSec person. So you need to know when to fight and not to fight for a start. You're not going to win every battle. If you know yourself and you know your enemy, you probably will. You'll come out on top in the end, but sometimes it's better not to fight. Rely on your defense in depth to protect you. Don't barrel in and start making arbitrary changes to prevent somebody from attacking. If you've got the courage and the conviction of your defense in depth, believe in it. That's not to say you shouldn't take countermeasures and keep an eye on what's going on. Especially if you think an account has been compromised, then by all means disable that account. Take those kinds of steps and measures. Some of the more important ones in there, I could go through each and every single one of them. Your army animated by the same spirit throughout its ranks. Your information security department, if you're working with a group of people, you need to keep your morale up, as well as being a beacon of hope to all those out there within the organization. It sounds really silly, doesn't it? But when the proverbial you-know-what is hitting the fan, and it will, whether you want it to or not, you are feasibly going to be the one who will need to deal with it, or your team, or you and your team, and maybe various other people. If you're panicking, if you're losing it, then you're not going to deal with things properly. Keep your morale up, keep your professionalism up, and make sure that you're showing that to the people around, because sometimes those people will be running around waving their arms above their heads and screaming and shouting and crying about what's going on. That's not going to help anyone. If you can show that you're dealing with it confidently and competently, then most of the others doing that will calm down as well around you, and they might actually, God forbid, prove to be a boon by actually helping you out. Now, the last item in there is the other one that I really want to specifically focus on. I said they're all really good points, but he who will win has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. Now, in an incident, and this is going to kind of come into it a bit with the wargaming thing that we're going to be talking about shortly. Sometimes if the incident is a difficult one, if it's a kind of on the higher end of an incident, you're going to have a lot of people trying to take control. You're going to have a lot of people trying to interfere or inject what their thoughts are into this. You need to try to promote, and usually this is by bringing in somebody from the C-suite. You need, hearts and minds with the C-suite. Get in with the C-suite, because when an incident kicks off, if you've got some middle management or you've got other people shouting and screaming at you that they know better than you do, and are causing you problem, you need to be able to call upon that C-suite to remove that, or to have a chat with the individual or individuals who are screaming and shouting at you. You are the information security professional. That is why you've been employed by that by that organization. So again, have the courage in your convictions and try to reduce the interference from outside sources when you're investigating an event, especially if if you suspect it to be an internal malicious actor, as we term it, because they might be even working against you to prevent you from finding out what has been happening. They don't want to get caught. So just be careful. Careful how you portray yourself, but portray yourself with confidence. And that's kind of some of the quotes. There's a lot of quotes in there. I suggest you read Sun Tzu. And when you're reading one of the quotes, or when you're reading one of the particular points, think about how feasibly it could apply within the information security realm as well, and how you're undertaking work. Be you a pen tester, and it's particularly good if you're a pen tester, because, well, you're pretty much waging war, testing the waging of war. Brilliant set of text to review, because you're going to be doing a lot of what it says, but in a more digital sense. But also, if you're a CISO, or you're an incident response person, or whatever you may well be in InfoSec, a lot of the Sun Tzu quotes and a lot of the items within there are particularly applicable. And I could probably write an entire book about it, and I might actually think about including it in my book. I don't want to plagiarize Sun Tzu completely, but there's some really good stuff in there that can help anybody kind of in their path and journey to becoming an InfoSec professional. So, wargaming. What is wargaming? Wargaming has been around for a long time, funnily enough. What it is it's basically where you are testing your security countermeasures against an actual event or a hypothetical event. Now, what do I mean by an actual event or a hypothetical? Well, if you've got a network infrastructure, you will need to have it pen tested at least once a year. That's the recommendation. Now, that is changing a little bit. Continuous pen testing is becoming a really big item now on a lot of organizations' agenda, because they realize that a single pen test is a snapshot in time. And a single pen test is great, but networks change. Items get patched, new kit gets introduced. All kinds of stuff can happen within an organization. And if you're only having one pen test a year, you're not feasibly picking up on a lot of the problems that you have. So a continuous pen testing solution or service is slowly becoming far more recommended these days than just that single snapshot in time. But in essence, it is a war game. You're using an ethical hacker to attempt to compromise your environment, not to do damage, but to find out where your vulnerabilities are and then notify you of them. So you can then go and hopefully get them fixed with the help of your IT department or whatever. It's called penetration testing, but in essence, it is wargaming. Another type of wargaming is a hypothetical item. Or hypothetical event, rather. Now, a hypothetical event is basically where you say, let's use an example. You'll get an incident response team, pull them together, and you go, right, guys, you need to be trained in how to do incident response, and we're going to need to drill it into us that how we do incident response by undertaking hypothetical issues on and dealing with them as though they were real. It's used quite a bit, obviously, in the military drills. You do one thing over and over again, you get very good at it. You get good muscle memory, you get, some good ideas that you can then flesh out. You can analyze what went wrong within that particular wargaming episode or wargaming activity and figure out where feasibly some of those problems within your organization lie. And they're not there to just cater for the technological side as well, because that is just one aspect of InfoSec. It's one section of InfoSec. That's why we do pen testing. And that's what that's for. That's why that type of wargaming is commonly accepted and undertaken by most organizations of any decent size, even today. When it comes to that hypothetical side, usually it's being done for business continuity purposes, to test a business continuity activity that you're doing, or program that you're undertaking. It could be you testing your incident response. It might be for a specific regulatory framework or compliance, such as PCI DSS. Good example, PCI DSS requires you to test your information security countermeasures, your incident response, and all that kind of stuff on a regular basis. I'm myself, in Razorthorn, we run a quarterly business continuity war game where we'll put people in different situations and see how they respond. And then from that, we analyze what the results are, and we come up with ways to improve the overall security of the organization. And we do it for a lot of customers as well. And again, quite often when I see people doing that kind of wargaming, I do see them sticking to the technical side. You've got to, obviously it's important to do, but there's not always going to be technical events that are going to trip you up. So a good example, an insider, malicious insider, let's just say a salesperson has decided that they want to move to a new organization, a competitor. They will have obviously access to the CRM database. They'll have access to information whilst they're gainfully employed by your organization that you're protecting. And they'll have access to that as standard. You don't necessarily want that information to get to the enemy, your competitors, because then they will get a competitive advantage. They'll know what your plans are. They'll know what you're capable of doing. They'll know what your countermeasures are. It's a good kind of war game to run through, but it's good to run through it from different perspectives as well. So war game it with the sales department. What would you do if you found that one of your colleagues was taking sensitive data and exfiltrating it out of the organization? Let's just say big deals, things like that, coming down the pipeline, that they then use to get a better job, and then they steal those deals from underneath you using the information that you had. Run that through a war game. Maybe you'll find that they have inappropriate levels of access to data or to databases. Maybe you'll find that they have, the ability to exfiltrate information in a medium that you didn't think that they could. You could even use one of the employees to attempt to do it. Obviously, you've got to get various different agreements to do that and that kind of thing. But you can, like a pen test does, actively get somebody to try to exfiltrate out information, see if they can do it. And there's all kinds of wargaming events that you can do. But as I said, don't stick to the technical side of things. Pick something that's a bit risky. If you've got a single point of failure, such as one finance director, what happens if that finance director leaves? What happens if that finance director gets run over and is in a coma? It sounds silly, doesn't it? But if they're a single point of failure within the business, and payroll is run through them, then people are not going to get paid at the end of that particular month, which is a big risk. And it is something that any information security person should consider. It sounds silly, is it? What's it got to do with information? What's it got to do with, with security? Well, you're protecting the organization. You're securing that organization from an event that has occurred that could feasibly cause it either loss or pain. And obviously, the inability to pay people tends to get people moving on pretty quickly. And a business with no employees is pretty dead. And it won't take long either. This is a funny example, but it's a good one. What else? There's all kinds of events you can role play through. Some with your incident response team, some with your BCP team, if they're different or whatever, but run them through. Once you've done it, if you've got a good incident response procedure, you'll have like a form that's filled out, or you'll have like a report that you generate at the end. What happened, why it happened, when it happened, who was the first responder, who did what over the course of time, and how was it finally resolved? Was there a band-aid measure put in place before a final fix could occur? And then at the end of it, in any good incident response program, you have lessons learned. Really important. What did you learn from that? And you'll do that for real events as much as you will do that for wargaming events. So in that wargaming report example that I just explained, single point of failure, finance officer, right? We should have a second person who knows and has access to be able to run payroll. Is it recorded accurately what people are due to get paid? What if there's commission involved from a group of salespeople? Where's that information stored? How does that feed into them? All of this can be analyzed and said, right, okay, we've got a single point of failure in our financial officer. He's the only one who's got access to all the information, although administrators can get access to it if they have to. It's just they won't know what to do with it. Now, these days, you always have some kind of accounting package or access to some kind of payment system. If they're the only ones who've got access to it, or God forbid, they're the only admins with access to it, and there's no other admins in your group, then you're going to have problems because A, you're not going to be able to log into it, and B, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do as an organization. And even if you were to employ a new finance officer, if they're not, if they don't have a login, if they don't know where the information is, there's only certain things that they're going to be able to do to try to help you resolve this particular issue. So don't be frightened when you're doing war games to come up with really, really interesting scenarios. Do some of the more mundane ones, maybe initially, just to kind of get people used to what a war game is, how it's run, how it's portrayed. But then over time, throw in the odd curveball, throw in, a couple of difficulties, throw in situations that are not technical, that are more arbitrary. If you have specific assets that are really important to the business, then construct a war game that could directly affect that critical asset. What happens if the CEO's account gets hacked? What happens if somebody's posing as the CEO and emailing staff members saying, can you give me a call on this number, or can you email me back on this? My email's not working and I need something done immediately. One of my own guys attempted to get phished with a similar kind of tactic a few weeks back. And from all the training that's been done and all the wargaming we've done, he spotted that it was possibly something a little bit dodgy, and communicated with me direct. Said, "Oh, Jim, I've had this email. It looks dodgy. I'm guessing this isn't you." And I went, "Well, yeah, damn right, it's not me." And it sounds silly, like, oh, why would anyone sort of fall for that? Well, people do. Otherwise, people wouldn't use those tactics in the first place. Bear that in mind. So, yeah, wargaming is quite a significant part of your portfolio of securing your organization, and make sure at the end of it, you draw up a playbook. One good tip with playbooks when you're drawing them up after you've had a wargaming exercise is to not make them too specific. Keep them so they're adaptable. It's important to keep adaptability in your incident response programs and as you kind of secure environments, because you never quite can tell exactly how things are going to pan out. You never can tell how attacks are going to progress. You can possibly predict some of it, but try not to dwell on absolutes when it comes to writing up your playbooks, because I guarantee a malicious hacker trying to ransomware attack, group trying to ransomware attack you, they're, one group is going to run it in one way. Another group is going to use totally different tactics and totally different means. So you're writing a playbook about what happens if ransomware is a thing. Now, obviously, lessons learned. Is our data unencrypted, or is it encrypted using access control that is not separated from the operating system? Because if somebody compromises your account and your encryption is tied to that account, then they're logging in with that account. What's the point in it? But equally, independent encryption then comes at a bit of cost, bit of usability cost, a little bit of understanding cost. So, your wargaming will feed into your stratagem going forward on what you need to address, issues you should probably look at, that kind of thing. And don't think that the wargaming is a group thing either. You can run it yourself in your own head, take an afternoon out, sit down, say, right, what would happen if somebody attacked our payment page on our website? How would that play out? And you can run it through yourself and come up with a pretty good plan of action of who you need to communicate with, what you would need to do, what kind of recovery time you're looking at. And you can build up a pretty good playbook that will help you out of that situation should you ever go through, unfortunately, one of those incidents. But even if that playbook isn't the greatest and it doesn't cater for things and you do have an incident, that's what the lessons learned there. Lessons learned. Update the playbook to encompass some of the attacks that we unfortunately experienced. Put it into risk management. Now we've got data of how much this particular issue or risk to the business cost. Let's update the risk management piece. Through wargaming, you might realize that there's a whole set of risks that you didn't spot when you were doing your risk program and your initial risk exercise. So what wargaming is there to do. Plus it's training, and it can be a compliance win as well. So let's go to the questions. Would I agree that it is better to specialize into a set amount of sectors rather than accept work for any sector? Not really. I mean, you can specialize in a specific sector if you want to. That's not to say you can't. I like personally to keep myself very general across all. So when I go in to secure legal company, you know, like a solicitor's firm or something like that, you know, I treat it as an individual entity whenever I walk through the door, you know, its own entity. I've done quite a few legal companies over the years, and as I said, there's similarities. I don't specialize in the legal sector because I do think, you know, if I do specialize too much in specific small sectors, I am kind of pigeonholing myself into that particular environment. And the more you do that to yourself, the more difficult it is to remember the walking in and treating everything like it's its own new independent entity, because you kind of get stuck in your ways. If you've been doing, you know, one of the good things about repetitive activity is that you get used to dealing with it. One of the bad things about repetitive activity is if you do it too much, you kind of forget that there's other things out there to do. You kind of find it difficult to move from one sector to another. And to be honest, information security is pretty similar across most sectors in the goals that it's there to achieve. The application of information security to different sectors is very different. But equally, it's a medium for you not to get bored as well. If you spent 10 years working in, you know, the retail industry as an information security professional, I guarantee you probably about 8 or 9 years in, you're going to get a little bit on the board side. It's like, actually, I'd like to do something else. I'd like to get my teeth into a finance company or a, you know, a manufacturing company or whatever it may well be. So I think it's a personal choice, but, you know, I wouldn't specialize too much. You know, I wouldn't advise it. Okay, a common problem I see is that businesses get scared about cybersecurity as they feel expected to have some sort of super complex system where they need a few simple things, e.g. simple lock to your bike. Suspect will pick the lock. I pick the one that is unlocked with very little effort, but 80% effective relates to the 80. Yeah, okay. Couple of things to unpack there. It is natural for people specifically to fear what they don't know. They know they don't want the outcome. They know they don't want to get hacked. They know they don't want some kind of loss to the business because it's bad. It's bad for them. It's bad for you. It's bad for the shareholders. It's bad for everyone. But cybersecurity is such a odd space where if people are kind of like, I see sometimes people, IT people, and I don't mean that badly to any of you out there in IT. I've been in IT for many, many years myself. Sometimes IT people specifically, as a good example, will not think something is possible. And they will kind of refuse to accept that something untoward is possible. Until something happens. And then, of course, they suddenly realize, oh, something is possible. Oh, dear. What do we do? You know? So part of the thing that I always say is hearts and minds is important. And one of the quotes that I use is, you know, security doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be frightening. It just needs to be effective, which kind of leads into the next side of things. The more complex you make your security, the tougher it is going to be to maintain. I'm not saying that you make it super simple at all times. There are some very complex security countermeasures you can put in place. And yeah, sometimes you should use those. But security should never be too overzealous in its application, because quite commonly I will find if I'm, you know, if someone's going overboard with the security in an organization, it will really start to affect the way they work. It will have a bit of a detrimental effect on being able to just make profit or do something efficiently or effectively. And that in itself becomes a security issue, because people, employees undertaking that activity will get annoyed that they have to jump through certain hoops. So they'll start trying to avoid those hoops. And you'll end up with a group of people who aren't following the process, aren't following the procedure, and have found some loophole that allows them to do something they're not technically meant to or should be doing. And they're going to try and hide it from you, which is even worse. So keep security simple as possible. Be as visual as possible with it is another important one. But be reasonable about it. Now, multi-factor authentication is a good example. Yeah. People are so used to usernames and passwords now. And I'm not talking about security people or IT people. I'm talking about the general populace. You know, your accountants, your solicitors, your average worker or whatever. They're so used to just needing to use a username and password. When you initially introduce multi-factor authentication, it can have a rather detrimental effect on their psyche. They don't like it. It's already complex enough that they've got to remember their, password, let alone remember the second factor. It used to be like a little sort of calculator type challenge response key that you would get asked to put in, and then it would give you a response, and you type the response in. But if you didn't do it quick enough, it would have changed. You've got to do it all over again. That's what people get annoyed at. When you're doing, your security, if you have done your homework, if you've understood yourself and your organization, you'll understand that maybe that group of journalists get on much better with username, password, and biometrics, like a fingerprint or thumb scanner, than they do trying to remember to carry around one of these little calculator thingies, like a token, as we term it. Maybe they'll get on better with a PIN, access to a specific solution within the environment, if they also get emailed a PIN. But then people get annoyed with that, because it's like, now I've got to wait for this bloody PIN so I can log in and do what I want to do. Again, maybe biometrics is a key thing there. But obviously, in some situations, biometrics might not be the thing. Maybe it doesn't work with that particular solution. Maybe Google Authenticator does. Part of your role in InfoSec really is to find good, simple ways to secure your environment well, and that aren't complicated for the average worker to have to navigate through. And multi-factor authentication, you could have 10 types of authentication. God knows why you would do it. Maybe that's a bit excessive, obviously, but I mean, you could put 3 factors in, but most people are going to reject that. Now, we do know, obviously, usernames and passwords are not efficient ways of securing access anymore. Computing technology has gotten so good at cracking passwords, usernames and passwords. It's a hell of a lot easier than it used to be. 2-factor authentication, gets around that. Is it costly? Yeah, of course, there's a cost associated with it. But if you make that second factor really simple for people to follow, then they won't try and get around it. And there's all kinds of sort of things that you can do. If you've got a bike and it's an expensive bike, let's say you've got a really expensive bike, maybe it's an electric bike. Those things are worth quite a few quid. You're not going to get your average bike lock, are you? You're not going to pick out a standard chain lock that with a low-end padlock on the other end. If you've shelled out a load of, $3 or $4 grand for a electrical bike, no, you're going to get some of the bar locks or some of the circular locks, or you're going to get a proper heavy-duty chain. Same thing with a bag lock. I carry around a bag lock. I do a lot of traveling. I spend a lot of time in kind of airports, that kind of stuff. And I've just found it's useful to carry a little it's a bit like a chain lock, really, but it's for a bag. It's retractable and extendable. And it just means I can attach my bag to the side, to the seat next to me. So if somebody wants to walk past and grab hold of it, especially if you're out in the street, they can't run off with it because I'm sat on the chair that it's attached to, or it's attached to my belt. I have done that before where I've got like a belt loop and I just put it through my belt and stick it down beside me. If somebody was to pick it up and run off with it, they're going to have to take me with it. And I'm 6'3", and I'm not exactly light as much as I'd like to lose a bit of weight. So it's going to be very hard to run off with a bag with me attached to it. Simple security countermeasures. And it can go to any level as well, even down to like you've got the user who can't seemingly stop losing his laptop or her laptop. Well, don't give them a laptop, or give them the cheapest possible laptop that just about does the job that they're there to do, and just accept that's going to be a cost you're going to incur on a regular basis. So, yeah, hearts and minds is everything in an organization, and especially if they've experienced a bad InfoSec person beforehand who's tried to sell them a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt as to why they should do stuff and all the rest of it. I tend to go on a complete opposite tack. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? What are you worried about? Blah, blah, blah. I do all of that stuff. But I help people. I help the developers do the development. I help keep security off their backs, but while still providing adequate levels of security. It's a dark art, and you do get used to it. It takes a bit of experience. One other thing I could probably recommend for stopping businesses getting scared about you or viewing you in a bad light is to don't immediately say no to everything, or even 90% or 50% of the things that you're being asked to do, or you're being asked your opinion on. Analyze it independently and individually, and with that individual as part of that process as well, and then layer your security on top. So you look after yourselves, have a great weekend, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.